Thomas Reed stood in the dusty foyer of Willowbrook Manor, his inheritance from an eccentric great-aunt he'd met exactly twice. The Victorian mansion's weathered exterior belied its solid bones, and as an architect specializing in historical restoration, he knew he'd struck gold, even if it meant leaving bustling Seattle for the quiet town of Cedar Grove, Maine. "Well, looks like it's just you and me now," he muttered, running his hand along the ornate banister. The house creaked in response, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light streaming through grimy windows. At 32, Thomas had restored dozens of houses, but this was different. This one was his. The blueprint spread across his makeshift drafting table revealed an oddity, a section of wall that didn't match the original plans. After 3 days of careful investigation, he decided it had to go. The wall wasn't load-bearing, and removing it would open up the space beautifully. Armed with his tools and protective gear, Thomas began the demolition. The first few strikes revealed typical lath and plaster construction, but as he cleared away more debris, his sledgehammer hit something that made a distinctly unwooden sound. A metallic ring echoed through the room. What the hell? He cleared more plaster away, revealing a surface that shouldn't exist. The material was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a seamless, iridescent panel that seemed to shift colors as he moved. His fingers traced what appeared to be a seam, and suddenly, the panel hummed to life. With a soft hiss, the wall split apart, revealing a chamber bathed in an ethereal blue glow. Inside stood what could only be described as a crystalline pod, its surface frosted over but clearly containing a humanoid figure. Thomas's heart pounded as he approached. The logical part of his brain screamed to call authorities, but curiosity drove him forward. As he neared the pod, the frost began to dissipate, revealing its occupant, a woman, but unlike any he'd ever seen. Her skin was a pale silver that seemed to shimmer, with intricate patterns swirling beneath the surface. Long hair the color of starlight floated around her as if suspended in liquid. As he watched, transfixed, her eyes snapped open, brilliant violet orbs that fixed directly on him. The crystal surface dissolved like morning mist, and she stepped out with impossible grace. "Well," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly melody, "you're certainly not what I expected to find after all this time." Thomas stumbled backward, catching himself against the wall. What are you?" She stretched languidly, her movements fluid and precise. "I am Aurelia, cultural observer first class of the Stellar Confederation. Though given how long I appear to have been in stasis, I suppose that title may be somewhat outdated." She glanced around the room with obvious curiosity. "What year is it, by your calendar?" 2025, Thomas managed to say. Aurelia's elegant eyebrows rose. 300 years? That's significantly longer than intended. She took a step forward and swayed slightly. Thomas instinctively reached out to steady her, his hands catching her shoulders. Her skin felt like silk over steel, warm but somehow different from human touch. "Fascinating," she murmured, studying his hands on her shoulders. "Your species has evolved considerably. Your genetic structure is far more complex than our initial surveys indicated." "Right," Thomas said faintly, releasing her. "Because you're an alien who's been hiding in my wall for 3 centuries. This is fine. This is totally fine. Your stress response is quite pronounced," Aurelia observed with scientific interest. "Though remarkably controlled given the circumstances. Most species exhibit much more extreme fight-or-flight reactions when encountering advanced civilizations." Before Thomas could respond, a sharp knock at the front door made them both freeze. "Mr. Reed," a male voice called out. "This is Agent Phillips with the Department of Energy. We've detected some unusual readings from your property. We need to speak with you immediately." Aurelia's expression turned serious. "It seems my stasis pod's emergency beacon activated during the wake-up sequence. Your government's monitoring capabilities have advanced more than anticipated. There's a back door through the kitchen, Thomas whispered, though he wasn't sure why he was already choosing to help her. Maybe it was the hint of vulnerability behind her confident demeanor, or maybe he was just losing his mind. "Why would you assist me?" Aurelia asked, tilting her head. "Your logical course of action would be to turn me over to your authorities." Another knock, more insistent this time. "Mr. Reed, we need you to open the door now." Thomas met her violet eyes and made a decision that would change his life forever. "Because whatever you are, whoever you are, I don't think you mean any harm. And I have a feeling there's a lot more to your story than just observation." A smile curved Aurelia's lips, transforming her alien features into something breathtaking. "How wonderfully irrational," she said. "Perhaps there's hope for your species after all." As footsteps circled around to the back of the house, Thomas grabbed her hand. "Time to go. I hope you're good at running." "I excel at many things," she replied, her fingers intertwining with his. "Though I must admit, this is not how I expected first contact to go." They slipped out through the kitchen just as the front door burst open, disappearing into the woods behind Willowbrook Manor. Thomas had no idea what he was getting himself into, but as he ran hand in hand with an alien who'd been sleeping in his wall, he couldn't help but feel that his life had finally gotten interesting. The old hunting cabin had seen better days, but it would have to do. Thomas locked the door behind them, though he doubted it would stop government agents if they managed to track them here. The cabin belonged to his friend who used it during deer season, and Thomas had borrowed the key months ago to assess some repair work. Aurelia moved through the small space with fluid grace, her silvery skin catching the last rays of sunset through dusty windows. "Your pursuit evasion techniques are surprisingly effective," she commented, examining a mounted deer head with scientific curiosity. "Though your respiratory system appears quite inefficient during extended physical exertion." "You mean I'm out of breath because we just ran 5 miles through the woods?" Thomas leaned against the wall, trying to catch said breath. "Not all of us were sleeping for 300 years. A smile flickered across her otherworldly features. "True. My stasis period did preserve my peak physical condition." She turned to face him, violet eyes intense. "You realize you're now classified as an accomplice in what your government would consider a serious security breach." Thomas ran a hand through his disheveled dark hair. "Yeah, well, letting them dissect you didn't seem like the right thing to do." He pulled out his phone, then thought better of it. "They can probably track this, can't they?" "Indeed." Aurelia held out her hand, and Thomas handed over the phone. Her fingers moved in a blur, interfacing with the device in ways that shouldn't be possible. "There. I've modified its transmission protocols. They'll receive false coordinates if they attempt to locate it." "That's handy." Thomas watched as she continued to manipulate his phone. "So, want to tell me what a cultural observer first class really does? Besides hiding in walls and hacking phones?" Aurelia settled onto the cabin's worn couch, her silvery bodysuit shimmering with each movement. "My people believe in studying developing civilizations from within. We integrate ourselves at crucial points in their development, gathering data and occasionally." She paused, choosing her words carefully, offering subtle guidance. "Like a galactic anthropologist?" Thomas sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance that Aurelia immediately closed by sliding closer to examine his facial features. "Your dermal response to stress is fascinating," she murmured, watching his cheeks flush. "The capillary system beneath your skin reveals so much about your emotional state." "Rule number 1, Thomas said firmly, trying to ignore how his pulse quickened at her proximity. "No analyzing me without permission. You humans and your rules." She sighed but leaned back slightly. "Though I suppose social boundaries are an important aspect of your culture. I should study them more thoroughly." Her violet eyes sparkled with mischief. "For scientific purposes, of course." A branch snapped outside, and they both tensed. Aurelia moved to the window with preternatural speed, her body low and alert. "Vehicle approaching," she whispered. "Military grade, based on the engine harmonics." Thomas's mind raced. "There's a cellar. Old root storage space. It's not much, but it will suffice." Aurelia was already moving toward the trapdoor he indicated. She paused halfway there. "Thomas, thank you. Your assistance is most unexpected, but not unwelcome." He helped her open the trapdoor, painfully aware of approaching headlights. "Yeah, well, maybe I'm conducting my own observation project. Studying aliens who pop out of walls and turn my life upside down." Her laughter was like wind chimes in a summer breeze. A worthy scientific endeavor. She slipped into the cellar with liquid grace, but caught his hand before he could close the door. "Your species continues to surprise me. Perhaps that's why I—" She fell silent, releasing his hand. Thomas secured the trapdoor and kicked a rug over it just as heavy boots climbed the cabin's porch steps. He opened the door before they could knock, coming face to face with 4 men in tactical gear. "Mr. Reed?" The leader held up a badge. "Agent Carson, Homeland Security. Mind explaining why you ran from federal agents at your residence?" Thomas leaned against the doorframe, channeling every ounce of casual confidence he could muster. "Honestly? I panicked. Inherited the place from my great-aunt, been doing some renovations. Thought maybe I'd uncovered something dangerous in the walls. Asbestos, you know. We detected unusual energy signatures." Carson's eyes scanned the cabin's interior. "Mind if we take a look around? Be my guest." Thomas stepped aside, his heart pounding. "Though I should warn you, my friend uses this place for hunting. Might be some questionable jerky in the cupboards." The agents conducted a thorough search, their sophisticated equipment beeping and whirring. Thomas held his breath when they passed over the trapdoor, but Aurelia's modifications to his phone must have affected their instruments as well. After 20 tense minutes, they left with nothing but suspicious glances. Thomas waited until the vehicle's sound faded before opening the trapdoor. Aurelia emerged like starlight taking human form, her movement somehow even more ethereal in the cabin's growing darkness. "Your deception skills are impressive," she noted, brushing dust from her bodysuit. "Though your elevated heart rate nearly gave you away twice." Well, hiding beautiful alien women from government agents wasn't covered in architect school. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Aurelia's skin shimmered with what he was beginning to recognize as her version of a blush. "You find this form beautiful? How intriguing. Though I should inform you that my actual appearance would be quite different without the morphic field generator." "I find you beautiful," Thomas said quietly. "Form, field generator, and all the weird scientific analysis included." She stepped closer, her violet eyes searching his face. "You do realize that any attachment between us would be highly problematic? I'm not even supposed to be having this level of interaction with your species." "Yeah?" Thomas smiled. "How's that working out for you?" "Poorly," she admitted, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw. "Your species has a disturbing ability to bypass logical protocols." Her fingers were warm against his skin. "I should be focused on contacting my people, on maintaining proper observation distance, on—" Thomas caught her hand in his. "Maybe some things are worth breaking protocols for." A series of rapid beeps from the direction of her stasis pod made them both jump. Aurelia's expression turned grave. "It seems the universe has poor timing. That's an emergency beacon, and not one of mine." "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said grimly, "that we're about to have company. And not the governmental kind." Aurelia's hands moved in precise patterns over her stasis pod's control surface, her silver skin reflecting the pod's pulsing red warning lights. Thomas watched from the cabin's window, dividing his attention between her and the night sky above. "Want to tell me what kind of company we're expecting?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "More of your people?" "No," Aurelia's voice was tight with concentration. "The signal is from the Nexar, a species my people have been monitoring for millennia. They're—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Let's say they're not as interested in peaceful observation as we are." "Of course they're not," Thomas muttered. "Because this situation wasn't complicated enough already." He moved away from the window to kneel beside her. "What aren't you telling me, Aurelia?" She stopped working, her violet eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "My mission wasn't just observation. 300 years ago, we detected Nexar scout ships in your solar system. They're scavengers, Thomas. They find developing worlds, wait until they reach a certain technological threshold, then harvest their resources, including the dominant species." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "And Earth has reached that threshold? Beyond it?" Her fingers traced patterns in the air, bringing up holographic displays that showed Earth's technological progress. "Your advancement since my inadvertent extended stasis has been remarkable. You've achieved nuclear power, space flight, quantum computing. You're precisely the type of civilization they target. So why were you really here?" Thomas watched her face carefully. "Not just to observe, I'm guessing." Aurelia's skin shimmered with what he now recognized as emotion. "I was meant to prepare defensive measures. My stasis pod contains technology that, when properly integrated into your planet's magnetic field, would have made Earth invisible to their sensors. But my pod malfunctioned, and now—" She gestured at the warning lights. "They're already here." A low rumble shook the cabin, too deep to be thunder. Thomas helped Aurelia to her feet as they moved to the window. High above, the stars were being blotted out by something massive moving across the sky. "They're harvest ships," Aurelia whispered. "They're earlier than expected. We have perhaps 72 hours before they begin their surface operations. Can we still implement your defensive measures?" "We?" She turned to him, surprise evident in her features. "Thomas, you should be running. Get as far from me as possible. Once they detect my pod signature. I'm not leaving you." The words came out fierce and certain, surprising them both. "Besides, sounds like running won't matter much if these Nexar harvest the whole planet anyway. So, what do we need to do?" Something shifted in Aurelia's expression, a softening around her eyes that made her alien features suddenly, achingly beautiful. "The technology needs to be integrated at multiple points around the planet, creating a resonance field that—" She stopped at his raised eyebrow. "Right. Simplified version, we need to get to 3 specific locations and activate portions of my pod's technology at each one. That's going to be fun with both aliens and the government after us," Thomas said dryly. "Please tell me you have transport capabilities in that magic pod of yours?" A small smile curved her lips. "Actually." She pressed a sequence of patterns on the pod's surface, and it began to transform, parts shifting and rearranging until it formed something that looked suspiciously like a motorcycle, if motorcycles were built by advanced alien civilizations. "You're kidding me. Rapid ground transport, modified to use your planet's primitive fuel sources." She ran a hand along its sleek surface. "I had 3 centuries to plan for contingencies, even in stasis. Though I didn't anticipate having human assistance." Thomas approached the vehicle with wonder. "And you trust me enough to help with this? To save my whole planet?" "Trust is complicated for my people." Aurelia stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the swirling patterns beneath her silvery skin. "We're taught to maintain distance, to observe but never interfere directly. But these past days with you—" Her hand came up to rest over his heart. "Your species feels everything so intensely. You act on instinct, on emotion, yet somehow achieve remarkable things because of it, not despite it. Is that your scientific way of saying you're starting to care? Thomas covered her hand with his, feeling her warmth through his shirt. Care is an inadequate word for, she broke off as another rumble shook the cabin, this one closer. Her expression turned serious. We need to move. The first integration point is in what you call the Rocky Mountains. If we leave now. The cabin door burst inward with a crash. Thomas pulled Aurelia behind him instinctively as two figures entered, tall, angular beings with dark exoskeletons and too many eyes. Administrator Aurelia, one of them clicked in a voice like breaking glass. The Stellar Confederation's interference ends now. Aurelia's hand gripped Thomas's arm. Nexar scouts, she breathed. Thomas, whatever happens, don't let them. The world exploded in a flash of blinding light. The flash of light faded to reveal Aurelia standing with her arm outstretched, a shimmering barrier of energy separating them from the Nexar scouts. Her silver skin pulsed with bands of light, and Thomas realized her morphic field was fluctuating under the strain. The transport, she said through gritted teeth. Get it started. Now. Thomas scrambled onto the transformed stasis pod, finding controls that somehow made perfect sense to his touch. The engine hummed to life with a sound like purring thunder. Your barrier technology is outdated, Administrator, the taller Nexar scout clicked, mandibles spreading in what might have been amusement. Like everything about your stagnant civilization. Perhaps, Aurelia replied, backing slowly toward Thomas. But some principles remain constant. Her free hand found a small device on her belt. Like the inverse relationship between shield harmonics and local gravity. She thumbed the device, and suddenly the floor beneath the Nexar scouts became a swirling vortex of force. They crashed through the weakened boards into the cellar below, their chittering cries cut off as Aurelia leaped onto the transport behind Thomas. Drive, she wrapped her arms around his waist. They'll recover quickly. Thomas gunned the engine, and the alien motorcycle shot forward through the broken doorway. They hit the ground in what should have been a bone-crushing impact, but the transport's advanced suspension made it feel like floating. Behind them, the cabin erupted in a blast of green energy. They seem upset, Thomas called over the wind as they raced through the dark forest. The transport navigated between trees with impossible precision, responding to his thoughts as much as his guidance. Want to tell me what that was about? The Nexar have been trying to discredit my people's methods for centuries. Aurelia's voice was close to his ear, her body pressed against his back. They believe developing civilizations should be harvested for resources rather than allowed to evolve naturally. Finding me here, with my technology. She paused as they burst onto a mountain road. I've essentially proven their accusations of interference. Because you're helping us? Thomas took a curve at speeds that should have been suicidal, the transport compensating flawlessly. Seems like a pretty big difference between helping and harvesting. The distinction matters less to them than, she stiffened. Above us. A dark shape blotted out the stars, and something that looked disturbingly like weapons ports began to glow. Thomas felt Aurelia's hands tighten around him. Hold on, she whispered, and suddenly the transport's engine note changed. The road beneath them became a blur as they accelerated to speeds that made Thomas's eyes water. Energy blasts cratered the asphalt behind them, each getting closer than the last. We can't outrun their ship forever, he shouted over the wind. We don't have to. There was a smile in Aurelia's voice. The Rocky Mountain integration point is in an old mining complex. The mineral content interferes with their sensors, and the tunnels are too small for them to follow effectively. Great, so we just have to get there alive. Thomas felt her laugh against his back. Something funny about our impending doom? Just appreciating the irony, she said. I spent 3 centuries preparing to save your world in secret, only to find myself racing through the night with a human who makes me question everything I was taught about non-interference. Is that your scientific way of saying you're falling for me? Thomas grinned as he felt her skin temperature rise slightly against his back. Focus on driving, she muttered, but her arms tightened around him. The tunnel entrance should be just ahead. We'll need to. The air in front of them shimmered, and another Nexar ship decloaked directly in their path. Thomas yanked the transport into a skid that should have killed them both, but Aurelia's technology transformed the motion into a controlled slide. They dove off the road into a ravine just as energy beams crossed where they'd been. The mining complex, Thomas gasped as they weaved through trees at insane speeds. Where exactly? There. Aurelia pointed to a dark opening in the mountainside. But Thomas, you should know, the integration process, there's a reason my people usually operate alone. What aren't you telling me? He felt her hesitate. Aurelia? The energy required, it's significant. As a non-native species, I can channel it safely, but a human in close proximity during the activation. She trailed off. Could be bad. Could be fatal. Thomas gunned the engine harder, buying them precious seconds as they approached the mine entrance. Then I guess you'll have to work fast. Thomas. Her voice held something he hadn't heard before, fear. Not of the Nexar, but for him. I won't risk your life. I can't. They shot into the mine tunnel seconds ahead of another energy blast. Thomas kept the transport at dangerous speeds despite the darkness, trusting its sensors and his instincts. Pretty sure that's not your choice to make, he said. Your people might believe in non-interference, but mine believe in fighting for what matters. He felt her start to protest and pressed on. And right now, what matters is stopping these harvesters, saving Earth, and... He took a deep breath. And finding out if an alien observer and a human architect can actually have a future together. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, crystal formations catching the transport's lights like frozen stars. As Thomas brought them to a stop, Aurelia's arms stayed around him for a moment longer than necessary. You impossible man, she whispered. Your species' capacity for irrational dedication should be classified as a superpower. Says the woman who spent 300 years preparing to save us. He turned to face her, finding her violet eyes glowing softly in the darkness. So, what's the plan? Before she could answer, multiple beams of light speared into the chamber from various tunnels. Nexar scouts emerged from the shadows, weapons raised, their many eyes gleaming. The plan, the lead scout clicked, is surrender. Though watching you try to escape has been entertaining. Aurelia stood tall, her silver skin blazing with internal light. Counter-proposal, she said, and Thomas saw her hand move to a hidden control panel on the transport. Run. The chamber erupted in chaos as Aurelia activated the transport's defense protocols. A sphere of pulsing energy expanded outward, sending the Nexar scout scrambling for cover. Thomas felt her grab his hand and pull him toward a crystalline formation that seemed to sing with strange harmonics. The transport's containment field won't hold them long, she said, her fingers dancing across the crystal's surface. They lit up at her touch, revealing hidden technological patterns beneath their natural facade. This was a backup installation site, prepared centuries ago. The crystals act as natural amplifiers for the integration technology. And this is where you tell me to get to a safe distance? Thomas kept his eyes on the Nexar regrouping behind their energy shield. Aurelia's hands stilled on the crystal surface. You're not going to listen even if I do, are you? Not a chance. He moved closer, watching the light play across her silvery skin. We started this together, we'll finish it together. A blast from the Nexar weapons impacted their protective barrier, making it flicker. Aurelia's expression turned fierce. The integration process takes exactly 43 seconds. The barrier will fail in 30. And the energy discharge. She met his eyes. It will be extremely unpleasant for a human nervous system. Only 43 seconds? Thomas grinned. I've survived board meetings longer than that. Another blast rocked their position. The Nexar were advancing methodically, their many eyes gleaming with cold purpose. The lead scout's voice cut through the chaos. Your dedication to this primitive species is puzzling, Administrator. They're barely past their industrial age. That's where you're wrong. Aurelia's hands moved faster over the crystals, which were now humming with increasing power. They're far beyond anything we expected. They create, they adapt, they feel. Her violet eyes found Thomas's. They love with an intensity that makes our calculated existence seem hollow in comparison. And that is precisely why they must be harvested, the scout clicked. Such emotional species cannot be allowed to reach the stars. They are too unpredictable, too dangerous. You're right about one thing, Thomas called out, buying time as he watched Aurelia's preparations near completion. We are unpredictable. He grabbed a crystal shard from the ground and hurled it at the Nexar's energy shield. The crystalline structure, already resonating with Aurelia's technology, created a feedback loop that shattered their defenses. The scout staggered, momentarily exposed. Now, Aurelia. She slammed her hand onto the central crystal formation, and the world turned to light and sound. Thomas felt electricity course through every cell of his body, raw power that should have killed him instantly. But Aurelia's free hand found his, their fingers intertwining, and somehow she was sharing the load, channeling the energy through both of them. Through the pain, he saw the integration wave expand outward, a ripple in reality itself. The Nexar screamed, their forms distorting as the wave passed through them. Above, through the crystal chamber's ceiling, he glimpsed their massive ships twisting in impossible ways before vanishing like mirages. Just when Thomas thought his body would give out, the energy subsided. He collapsed to his knees, still holding Aurelia's hand. She knelt beside him, her silver skin pulsing with aftershocks of power. "You impossible, wonderful fool," she whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. "You should be dead." The energy required to create a planetary defense field. "Maybe your calculations didn't account for human stubbornness," he managed to smile despite feeling like he'd been struck by lightning. "Or maybe." He caught her hand against his cheek. "Maybe some connections are stronger than physics." The chamber's crystals still hummed softly, but the violent energy was gone. In its place was a subtle resonance that seemed to sync with Earth's natural magnetic field. The Nexar ships above were gone, and with them, the immediate threat to humanity. "It's done," Aurelia said softly. "Earth is protected. The integration is permanent, they'll never be able to find this planet again." She helped Thomas to his feet, supporting him when he swayed. "My mission is complete. So what happens now?" He tried to keep his voice steady, knowing what protocol would demand. "Your people will be coming to collect you, I guess." She was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes studying his face as if memorizing every detail. "Actually." A small smile curved her lips. "I may have taken certain liberties with my final transmission." "Oh?" "I informed them that long-term observation of humanity's response to the integration technology would be necessary. Years of careful study, in fact." Her smile widened. After all, no other species has ever survived direct exposure to the integration process. "You're quite the scientific anomaly." Thomas pulled her closer, hope blooming in his chest. "And your people agreed to this extended mission?" "They were quite insistent that I continue my research." Her arms slid around his neck. "Though I may have neglected to mention that my interest in human resilience has become somewhat personal." "How very unscientific of you," Thomas murmured, leaning down until their foreheads touched. "Indeed." Her eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper, warmer. "It seems humanity's tendency toward emotional decisions is rather contagious. I might need several decades to study the phenomenon properly. Only several decades? Well, she whispered against his lips, let's start there and see what data we collect. As Thomas kissed her, the crystals around them sang with harmonics that seemed to echo the beating of their hearts, one human, one alien, but perfectly in sync. Above them, Earth's new protective field shimmered invisibly in the atmosphere, a testament to what could be achieved when duty and love worked in harmony. And in a forgotten mining chamber deep in the Rocky Mountains, an alien observer and a human architect rewrote the protocols of both their species, one heartbeat at a time.